Today's webinar is titled Human Trafficking Education for EMS Educators: How to Better Prepare EMS Clinicians, presented by Robin McMillen and William Cebulskie. I'm going to pass it over now to our presenters. Thank you both so much for being here with us today to share your knowledge and experience with us, and we look forward to the presentation.
All right. Hi, everyone. And again, like Ria said, thank you for joining us. Before we dive into the content material, I just wanted to point out that there could be some content that could be emotionally provoking for some individuals. There's going to be reference to physical abuse and different sexual conduct that are relevant to human trafficking. So I just wanted to make sure that those were aware before we got started. So just some brief introductions. My name is William Cebulskie. I am from Pennsylvania and relatively central Pennsylvania, as is our co-presenter, Robin. I am the EMS side of this presentation, where Robin is more of the expert in the human trafficking side of things. So we're looking forward to having all of you with us today, and I'll turn it over to Robin to give a brief introduction.
Hello, everybody. As Billy said, I'm from Reynoldsville, Pennsylvania, and I work for Passages, which is the Rape Crisis Center. I work in 3 counties in central Pennsylvania, Clarion, Jefferson, and Clearfield. And I have been in the field of sexual violence for almost 15 years.
And before we kind of get started, I did just kind of want to bring to light to everyone a personal connection to human trafficking that both Robin and I have. Definitely more so Robin than me, but interestingly, Robin and I have been doing some similar programs like this for the last few years. Robin and I are actually next door neighbors in my hometown. I grew up with Robin right next door, a second mother growing up, but later on in life, she had an incident, which I will let her explain, that exposed me to the real side of human trafficking and what it is modernly. So I will let Robin kind of explain that from here.
In 2018, through my work at the Child Advocacy Center in Clearfield County, I was exposed to a sibling group of 6 who were labor trafficked by their adoptive parents. Through that experience, my husband and I, and basically anyone that we encountered, really dealt with the aftermath of what happens after children and teens are removed from a trafficking situation. Their story is actually quite phenomenal, and it's much too long and crazy to kind of delve into here. But it also has fueled my passion, and I think Billy's too, about what happens to victims of trafficking.
All right, and with that, then we'll go ahead and kind of start into the program. So unfortunately, today there's a lot of information that we're going to cover in a short period of time. So without going into all of the specific objectives that Robin and I designed for the course, there are 3 overarching objectives that we just want to kind of point out. And that is, we want to enable all of you to identify potential human trafficking. We want all of you then to be able to return that knowledge to your classrooms or to your stations, whatever it may be. And then we want to provide you with the resources so that you can provide students with resources regarding human trafficking. So why is human trafficking relevant to EMS or EMS education? And there are a lot of reasons for this. So for one, and I will go over this a little more in depth in these future slides, but human trafficking victims have a significant exposure to emergency departments and EMS. Furthermore, the 2021 National EMS Education Standards include some entry-level knowledge at all levels of EMS certification, and we're seeing more and more exposure to concepts of human trafficking or the overall subject of human trafficking in EMS protocols and policy statements around the country. So from an education perspective, I took this right from the 2021 National EMS Education Standards, and you can see in the public health overview section, under all 4 certification levels, EMR, EMT, AEMT, and paramedic, human trafficking is specifically mentioned. So there's definitely an effort to raise awareness and to make sure that our initial education programs are including some level of content for human trafficking. And one of our main goals here is to be able to provide you, the educators, with the resources and the adequate knowledge to go back and make sure that these students are getting this information. So over the last few years, there have been several organizations in EM or EMS that have addressed human trafficking. And some of the big ones that pop up that you might be familiar with are, so a NEMSAC committee came up with an advisory in 2021. The American College of Emergency Physicians came up with a policy statement in 2020. In 2017, the Pennsylvania Bureau of EMS actually created an entire human trafficking protocol statewide. The Emergency Nurses Association, the American Medical Association, NAEMSO, they all have addressed human trafficking in some way, and their policy statements or information are available for all of you to read, and it has a lot of good information. But with this building momentum of addressing human trafficking within our specialties, we wanted to make sure that we could provide some updated information and make sure everyone is aware of the realities of human trafficking and why it's important for EMS clinicians to be able to identify this. So one piece of literature that I wanted to bring up is a research article that was published in the Annals of Healthcare Law in 2014. And this piece of work here really specifically looked at sex trafficking. However, it still had some significant information to kind of paint the picture as to why it's important for EMS and emergency medicine to be able to identify it. So 70% of victims that were included in this survey reported some sort of physical injury. So a lot of these patients that are trafficked are going to have some sort of physical injury, and oftentimes more than one. And that's going to present in our assessments as EMS clinicians. Now, 41.5% of the survey respondents of people that had been trafficked in this survey reported that they had attempted suicide. So again, another indication that EMS may come in contact with these patients pre-hospital. And then also 63.3% of the respondents of this survey reported that while they were being trafficked, they visited an emergency department. So one of the few forms of healthcare that a lot of trafficking victims are getting is through emergency medicine. Now, there's another national organization called the Polaris Project, and I would urge all of you to look at their information as well regarding this subject matter. But they published this document called On-Ramps, Intersections, and Exit Routes, a roadmap for systems and industries to prevent and disrupt human trafficking. And what this included was a survey in which they looked at what type of healthcare patients or victims of human trafficking were receiving while they were being trafficked. And just some notable things that I thought were interesting. And granted, the sample size was on the smaller end. It was 88 individuals that had been trafficked. 68% of them, so 60 of them in total, reported that they had visited the emergency department and or were hospitalized. And then on top of that, really specific to EMS, 28% of them reported that they had exposure with EMS or an ambulance via the 911 system. So these patients are definitely visiting the ERs, and they are using EMS as well. So what is human trafficking, though? And part of this entire program is for you as the educator or the EMS clinician to have a true understanding of what this is. And we have to be prepared to teach this in our classrooms with what the realities are. And unfortunately, sometimes the realities are very challenging and are very upsetting emotionally for individuals that aren't even involved in the trafficking process. And that's what we're going to get into here today. So I will go ahead and pass this over to Robin.
This is probably the easiest definition for people to understand. It's the human trafficking is also called modern day slavery. It's essentially the business of stealing freedom for profit by force, fraud, or coercion. I think everyone can understand what force would be. That would be the beatings, the sleep deprivation, those sorts of things. The fraud is the lure that they think it's something else. Think mail order brides, think lure of a job. And the coercion, the easiest definition, and from the easiest way that I understood it, was the coercion is the threat of the force. So if you don't do what I tell you to do, then the force is going to happen, whatever the trafficker would deem that would be. It's important to understand that human trafficking is not human smuggling. And I think just by the terminology trafficking, most people think that there has to be movement from one place to another. And that's simply not the case. And I think on the next slide, if Billy would bring that up, we're going to explain the difference. Human smuggling is a crime against a country or a state. It's an illegal border crossing. What's happening, down on our southern borders, people are trying to come into our country. That's transportation based, and it's usually voluntary because they want to get somewhere else. With human trafficking, individuals can be trafficked without ever leaving their house. My foster sons and my adopted sons were trafficked right out of their house. They never left the county. It's exploitation based, it's involuntary because they can't leave it, and it's a crime against a person. However, there is that intersection that both human trafficking and human smuggling are both big businesses. And it's very possible for those two things to occur at the same time. There's two different kinds of human trafficking, labor trafficking, which my boys were labor trafficked, and also sex trafficking, which I deal more with my work because I work for a rape crisis center. So that's what I happen to encounter more. But there are two different types. And this is a question to kind of get everyone thinking about this a little bit. If you went into a kindergarten classroom and say there's 25, 5-6-year-olds, and you ask them what they want to be when they grow up. And the little girls, I want to be a veterinarian. You see how well that worked out for me. Or they want to be princesses. Little boys want to be firemen or superheroes. But I don't think anyone ever raises their hand and says, I would like to be human trafficked, or I would like to be a drug addict. So there's some catalysts that happen along the way from those vulnerable little kids who the world was their oyster at that point to ending up where they're being trafficked. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why they do get trafficked. Go ahead, Billy. One big thing are the drugs. This is Dr. Marlene Carson. She's one of the foremost authorities on domestic child sex trafficking here in the United States. She herself is a survivor from Columbus, Ohio. And in a phone conversation with her, she had made the quote, "Follow the drugs, follow the money, you'll find the girls." So people and kids and teens and women often get trafficked because it follows the culture of the drug trade. Either sometimes the dealers also deal not only in drugs, but also in flesh, basically. And oddly enough, people get trafficked to fulfill the need for family, safety, love, and belonging, which that seems totally counterintuitive to why you would think anyone would get involved in trafficking. But we're going to explore that in a little while. But that is definitely one of the risk factors. Sometimes it's the lure of a job. I think everyone, at least in our neck of the woods here in Pennsylvania, have seen those signs along the road, summer work. Also, modeling is a slippery slope, and that can kind of, I'll give you a little analogy for that. Say a girl is at the mall or at a store or convenience store, and somebody comes up to her and says, "Boy, you are really beautiful. Have you ever thought about modeling?" And the girl's like, "No." I said, "Boy, you could really make a lot of money. I have a friend who's a photographer, and he actually has a hotel room set up. And what he does is I'm kind of his recruiter, and he finds my job is to go find women or young girls who we know that we could make some money, by doing some headshots for them. So first of all, what woman doesn't want to be told that they're beautiful, right? There's the lure of fast cash. So it's a very slippery slope, and it's not all that unheard of that it's the lure of a job. Just in October, I was called for a trafficking victim out of Guatemala. And when I spoke to her, she was only 15, had been in the country for close to a year, I think 12 or 14 months. And when I was speaking to her, she came to the United States because she wanted to send money back home. Oddly enough, or coincidentally enough, my daughter just got married to a Guatemalan. So I have traveled extensively to Guatemala. I've been there like 30 times. And I've walked in the poverty. I've seen people trying to raise their families in cornstalk houses on a dirt floor with no money, doing backbreaking agricultural work. And the lure of, you go to the United States, you can easily get a job as a domestic help or in the hospitality industry. I can see how it's very, very attractive to think that that's, going to be a source of good money to send back to the family. And that's what that girl told me, is she wanted to send money home. So the lure of a job is a real thing. Also the bondage of debt, and that can look a lot of ways. And it doesn't have to be a wallet full of money, so to speak, that they owe. And it can kind of look something like this. Say a teenager isn't getting along with their parents at home. So they take off and they go stay with a friend while they're sleeping on the couch. And pretty soon the friend says, well, how do you think you're going to, we've been feeding you, you've been living here, eating our food, using our electric, using our water. What are you going to do to pay that off? So it can look kind of like that, as in kind of survival sex, so to speak. But again, they're indebted to somebody who's taking care of them. Who are the traffickers' easiest targets? And we're going to explore some of these. Anybody living in poverty. Poverty breeds desperation, just as homelessness does. I don't know how many of us on this particular webinar have really not had enough food to eat. I know me, I eat too much, so I can't relate to that. But I know families in our county that are homeless. I know individuals who don't have water, who don't have heat, and desperation can certainly drive a lot of this. Mental health concerns. Anyone who has mental health concerns, they're vulnerable to a lot of things, and being trafficked is no different. Unaddressed trauma, those are the people who feel that they deserve nothing better, or maybe they have never worked through their trauma, so they don't think their value is any more than being trafficked. So that's certainly a vulnerability. Lack of supervision, those are the kiddos who are left alone, maybe unattended for long periods of time while mom or their caretaker works. And it also can be lack of supervision on the internet too. Abused children. Abused children are particularly vulnerable. It kind of goes along with the unaddressed trauma. If they haven't worked through their abuse, sometimes they think that that's just normal, that they think the abuse is normal, that they think all kids are like that. And when we got our boys who were labor trafficked, I was their foster parent and then their adopted parent. I asked them, so when did you think that what you were going through was wrong? And they were like 13, 14 years old before they understood that what they were living was not the norm for families. So abused children are definitely at risk. Runaways and throwaways. I think we all know what a runaway is. Any guesses in the chat what a throwaway child is? We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Does anyone have a guess? Throwaway kids are the kids that the parents kick them out. Get out, stay out, and don't come back for whatever reason. they are at particular vulnerabilities. Also, the LGBTQ, and there's probably some other letters after that now, but that population is also very susceptible to being trafficked. If there's drug or alcohol abuse in the family, is a particular vulnerability. Again, if there's drug or alcohol abuse, is anyone supervising the kids? What are the parents going to do in order to get their next fix? We have so many kids that I work with on a daily basis that the substance abuse is just rampant where we live, and it creates a lot of vulnerabilities. Incarcerated parents, if the parents aren't there, you have to think, now who's caring for those kids? You know, where are those kids with somebody, another family member? Oftentimes there's generational traumas and generational incarceration. So that also puts the kiddos at a vulnerability. And the one near and dear to my heart is foster care involvement. If you think about the reasons why a child comes into foster care, it's usually, if you think the ESPN, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect. And I can say I think we've had 16 foster kiddos over the past few years. Drugs and alcohol have played a part in every single one of them. And with that comes no family support, you know, and their vulnerability of, you know, moving from home to home to home. And where do they think, where do I belong? You know, where is home? And it's a real issue in the foster care world with the kiddos. Go ahead, Billy. In the chat, can anyone guess which two of those factors that we just talked about, which are the greatest risk factors of the poverty, the homeless, the mental health, et cetera? Does anyone have any guesses on what is two of the most vulnerabilities? We have an answer: mental health, homelessness, foster kids. The two biggest risk groups or at-risk groups are the runaways, the throwaways, I kind of group them together, and kids who are in foster care. And that is kind of research based, and I've kind of made it my mission through the work that I do, is that we hand out bag tags like we'll go on a backpack with all the 800 numbers and resources that they would need, because you have to understand when kids are in foster home, they move constantly. It's not unusual for a child in foster care to have, you know, 15, 16, 17 different placements in a short period of time. So runaways and throwaways and foster kids are the biggest. Go back one slide, Billy. The pimp slide. I never realized until a couple of years ago that pimp meant put in my pocket, as in money. Pimp, the word pimp kind of almost glorifies it a little bit. There's actually a pimp convention that's held a couple times. I think it's either in Chicago or Miami, and it's who's the best pimp. We prefer to use the word trafficker or exploiter or seller of children, because it doesn't give the image of, you know, the fur coats, the gold chains, that sort of thing, when in fact, many of the traffickers can look very ordinary. Billy, you can move to the next slide. And actually the traffickers of my boys, both of them are on this page. Anyone want to take a guess? It's a husband and wife team who traffic my boys. But if you look at them, you know, most of them look very ordinary. You know, you wouldn't expect them. That's not always the bushy-haired stranger, you know, hiding in an alley waiting to hop out and snatch children. So we're going to talk a little bit about the vulnerabilities. So how do they get these kids? Again, it's not the stranger hiding in the bushes, ready to snatch your kids from the yards or from the bus stop. I think statistics show that kidnapping only is 1% of how individuals are put into the trafficking. I don't think it would be anyone's surprise. The recruitment on social media is the number one. It went from Facebook Messenger, used to be the number one. Now it's, of course, Snapchat. I don't know if anyone here works with law enforcement that much, but Snapchat is the devil when it comes to law enforcement trying to investigate anything. We've also had a few cases of stuff that's happening on Discord, online video games, any place that there is the messaging platform, which I think a lot of the games and the social media platforms do have that messaging, and it starts out very innocent. It'll be maybe a teen will post something somewhere, or they will do a quick ad of somebody on Snapchat. They don't really know them, but they do the quick ad because they might know them. And we've had several instances that the emoji or the bit, whatever it is, looks like, a teenage boy, and really it's a 50-year-old man. We've had young girls receive packages from people that they've met online, and it'll have edible underwear in, and just different sex toys and money, and all of that because they were online and ended up sending them, addresses, or it was obtained just from the interactions happening on Snapchat or some of the other platforms. In our area here in central Pennsylvania, there have been some online predator groups sprouting up that they actually are doing some what they call predator catches, where men are attempt to meet young girls and young women. And I can tell you that there's no shortage of men looking to hook up with young girls. There is no shortage at all. A couple of years ago, one of our local police departments did kind of a sting, and there was a man who came from another county to actually purchase one of the girls to take back to his own county to start his own little, they call them a stable, which is what a trafficker would call the number of girls that he has working for them. Okay, Billy? Some places where trafficking happens, some of these aren't going to be surprising. Happens in hotels, of course, massage parlors. Go ahead. The streets, spas, online, neighborhood homes, truck stops. There's actually a group called Traffickers Against or Truckers Against Trafficking, and they actually do some training with truck drivers to spot trafficking. Some places that they can recruit from a school, they can recruit from a playground, they can recruit from a mall, they can just literally recruit anywhere. So it's not because you don't allow your child or your teen to go a certain place that automatically makes them safe. One thing that a trafficker will do, there's actually a couple different kinds of what they call pimps or traffickers. There's one that's called the Romeo pimp. And so what they do is they give the illusion, especially to young girls, that they're in a relationship with them. Okay. So first they start out as the boyfriend, and then it morphs into a trafficking situation. The other kind is called a guerrilla trafficker, and those are the ones that use force or starvation or beating to keep them enslaved. So a couple of the reasons why they stay enslaved is a threat to the family. So you have, we'll say a young girl runs away, she's mad at her parents or whoever her guardians are, and she hooks up with an online boyfriend. Well, then he's not going to let her go home because they're making threats to members of her family. Oftentimes they will do forced drug use, because we all know, and I'm sure all of you in the EMS world know, an addict will do about anything to get their next fix. So the girl or the boy who's being trafficked, they have a constant supply of drugs. So, and for that, they will do about anything. And thirdly is just lack of options. If we think back to who we talked about are the vulnerable population. If your most vulnerable population are the kids who live in foster care and the kids who are running away, they're in foster care for a reason and they ran away for a reason. So oftentimes being with the trafficker is not a lot worse than the position that they were in to begin with, that made them be in foster care or made them run away to begin with. So sometimes they stay just because they have no other place to go. At least that's the devil they know, as opposed to the devil that they don't know. Trauma bond, I never really understood this until I had our boys. I love the quote on the side because it is exactly what it's like. From the outside looking in, it's hard to understand. From the inside looking out, it's hard to explain. I am sure many of you have worked with individuals who have been in a domestic violence situation. I think the average woman tries 7 or 8 times before they actually leave a domestic violence situation. And why is that? Because initially they were the boyfriend. Initially they were Prince Charming. So the initial relationship will always be the most influential on the trafficking victim. Because remember, they're not kidnapping them. Usually not. They lure them by being their friend or becoming their boyfriend. Or in the case of my boys, it was their adopted parents. So first they were their parents. So it wasn't bad the second that they met these people or were put in this position. So it started out good, and then it morphs into being trafficked. So that initial relationship will always be the most influential. Through my course of work, and my boys suffered tremendous abuse, unimaginable abuse. In fact, one of the troopers that were on their case said, you know, this is like war crime stuff. You know, they were almost drowned. They were beaten every single day of their lives, but they still harbored some feelings for their parents. And that was really a struggle. It was really a struggle for them. And when it came time to go to court, because they were charged, and the dad has since died in prison, but the mom is still in prison, they still struggled with it. And when we went to sentencing, I had one of the boys who was the most vulnerable to their abuses because he was most sensitive. He wanted to get up and like speak on their behalf at sentencing, you know, and I'm looking back because I know what these boys went through. I know what it was like to raise them after they got out of that. And it was just so hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that they still had emotions around that, because at first they were their parents. So that's really important to understand, that they don't always want to leave, okay? The other thing is that they create a dependency on the basic needs. In the case of my boys, they were homeschooled, they lived on the farm, they worked every day, they weren't exposed to really anybody else. So they depended totally on their family, as they should. And then there's also the constant manipulation and distrust. They're always told they can't trust police, they can't trust medical providers, they can't trust anybody. So they have this internal dialogue that, you know, it's just them against the rest of the world. Okay, it's them and their trafficker against everybody else. And, you know, if you stop and think about it, I mean, it makes sense, but it's it's really hard, especially when you're up close and personal with it, because I'm like, guys, like, you were beaten to within an inch of your lives, and yet you still care about them. So it's a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around. Go ahead, Billy. So we're going to talk about some of the signs that you as providers might be able to pick up on. Oftentimes it is difficult to identify the victims. Okay. Number one, sometimes they don't want to be identified as a victim. All right. They don't know that it's wrong. If it's a little girl who's being trafficked by her parents and no one ever told her that that's wrong, they don't know. Our agency has prevention educators that go in the schools and, talk to kids about good touch, bad touch. And they almost always get disclosures from the kids that they didn't know that somebody touching them was wrong. Because if their parents don't tell them, they have to get that information. So someone has to tell them. Sometimes they're not looking to be rescued. Remember who our vulnerable population is. Maybe being trafficked is better than where they were, especially the kids who are in foster care or the runaways. Maybe at least the trafficker gives them food. Maybe at least they know that they have a roof over their head. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the one underneath, running away from something worse at home. Sometimes it's that psychological hold over the victim. He still tells me that he loves me, and these are kiddos and teens who so want someone to care about them, so maybe someone just saying, but I love you, is enough for them. Could be a family member that's trafficking them. And that's really hard. Are they going to come forward and report mom or dad? Probably not. Sometimes they're labeled more as criminals than victims. Remember the forced drug use, so they might be getting picked up or, have gotten charged or being a known drug user. So then it's easy to say, oh, they're just an addict, when actually they're a victim. They're trained to lie, and they're also trained to distrust authority and outsiders. So all of those things make it really hard to identify them. It doesn't mean that they're not out there, but those are some reasons why they're not going to come up, and cling onto your sleeve on scene and say, help me, I'm being trafficked, because of all of these factors that make it difficult for them. Here's some things that you may or may not see. Signs of physical abuse, suspicious tattoos, or branding indicating ownership. Sometimes those might say something like daddy, or I've seen actually barcodes printed, because they're just a commodity to be purchased. Malnourishment. When I got my boys, or when they were first removed out of their trafficking situation, they were all malnourished. And very, very thin. Multiple recurrent STIs. You may or may not know that. Abnormally high number of sexual partners. You may or may not know that. Of course, you might be more able to see signs of drug or alcohol abuse. Multiple cell phones or devices. A trafficker is never gonna let one of their victims just have free reign, you know what I mean, to call and do whatever they want. So sometimes they have multiple cell phones for checking in, large amounts of cash or prepaid credit cards that can't be, traced back. If there's multiple children with an unrelated male or female, or if there's a young girl with an overly controlling or abusive boyfriend or older female. Again, some of these can be difficult for you to assess during the course of your normal, interaction or assessments. But there might be some things in here that make you stop and think, I wonder what's going on here. Go ahead, Billy. Possession of unusual or unexplained sexual paraphernalia. Somebody who appears frightened, resistant, or belligerent to law enforcement. Sometimes these are not your easy people to deal with. We'd like to think that these are the patients that are going to, happily, crawl up on the cot if you need them to, but actually they can be very resistant because they don't want help for all of the reasons that we've described before. And some of these you're not going to know just during the course of your assessment. You're not going to know what their change in behavior is. They can use trafficking lingo too. If they refer someone to daddy or their family, but their family isn't mom, dad, and sisters, brothers. It can be like random people, or if they avoid answering questions or let others speak for them or on their behalf, or they lie about their age or identity, or sometimes they don't even know where they're at. They don't really have a concept of dates or times. Oftentimes they don't have documentation on them. They don't have a driver's license on them, a social security card, anything that would have their name on.
All right, so then real quick, I just kind of want to go over with everyone some different behaviors that could be seen throughout a patient assessment that may lead to some consideration that that patient is being trafficked. So one, a very depressed mood, or the opposite there, having anxiety or hypervigilance, especially related to questions about demographic information or trying to, when the EMS clinician is trying to get a story. Another red flag may be that they have an unexplained story as to why they have these severe injuries or these illnesses, or their stories are relatively conflicting. So as that clinician is going down and doing these assessments, the story changes, or 1 minute it was one thing and then it changed to the next minute. Some other red flags are signs of drug or alcohol abuse, as Robin had mentioned. Now, some really red flags may be a scripted story or very scripted answers to a question. They don't think about it. It is verbatim, time after time again, the exact same answer or very similar answers. And those scripts that they use are embedded into them by their traffickers to make sure that they don't give out any information. And furthermore, there may be hesitation to answer questions or explain how they have an injury or explain how they have an illness. So when we start to put these pieces together, what we need to try to do as EMS clinicians is to let that flag be raised and then work on reporting that or doing whatever process is necessary to try to get them help. And again, like Robin said, a lot of these patients are not going to be the easy patient that just will accept any help you offer or want to talk to you or even want to go to the hospital. So we have to take all that into consideration.
Billy, can I just interject there?
Absolutely.
Just one time, you know how you always go to the doctors and they say, do you feel safe at home? The boys had been to the doctors for different things, and they knew they could not say no, they didn't feel safe at home, because they knew if there was any inkling or suspicion from the outside, they knew that they would be beaten worse. So even direct questions that you'd say, well, there's your opportunity, to get help, they're usually afraid. Some of the barriers for victims to come forward, we kind of went over some of them, but shame or guilt. Imagine you went forward and you had to talk about having sex with hundreds of men, thousands of men. I don't think anyone wants to go forward and talk about any of their sexual experience, let alone that sort of sexual experiences. Oftentimes it was a fear of retaliation by the trafficker. And that's exactly what happened with our boys. They knew if they said anything, they were going to get it. They were pulled out of school, so they didn't have any access to mandated reporters. And again, we talked about they don't readily identify as a victim. Some of that's that unaddressed trauma, that history of physical and sexual abuse, that they just figured, this is just my life. This is all that I deserve. There's the fear to report to social services. again, going back to the foster care system, say they had a terrible, terrible experience in the foster care system, because not all foster parents are good. There's some that do abuse there. So they fear, well, if I report, then I know I got to go back into foster care, if they're a minor. There's the fear of arrest or deportation. Again, there's the connection to the drug trade. They're afraid they're going to get caught with drugs on them, because sometimes the traffickers will have them run drugs for them. They're the ones carrying the drugs. Or deportation, just like the young girl I have from Guatemala. She incidentally is in a Homeland Security facility down in Texas, and I don't know if she's going back to Guatemala. I don't know what the plan is. I've not heard back. And then there's the lack of transportation or controlled movement. They don't have access to go do or go wherever they want. They're always being monitored. So even if they did decide, hey, I want to get out of here, I want to get away from this life that I'm living, that's not as easy to walk away. Again, they're not going to have documentation. They're not going to have money. They're not going to have ways to get away from the trafficker.
All right, so then I kind of wanted to talk with everyone about how an EMS clinician may be a barrier to these trafficking victims or the patients that we encounter. And unfortunately, as we see across the board, and not only healthcare and medicine, but in many other fields of employment, there's lots of bias and implicit bias that we have. And what I want to instill into everyone, especially those of us that are educators or that have the ability to work with others in the EMS field, is that we need to try to instill that we need to leave our own personal bias about this part of town or this type of person or whatever that may be out of what we're doing and how we're taking care of patients. And that should be across the board with any patient that we have, but especially these patients that may be having, all sorts of judgment because of where the ambulance is picking them up from. And so whenever we're teaching, I would hope that we can instill the elimination of bias and make sure that we are treating our patients appropriately. And in the beginning of the presentation, I had mentioned the Polaris project, and you can see the two quote boxes there. And these were, I took it right from them. And these are quotes from victims of trafficking and relating to their healthcare experiences. So as you can see, one thing I kind of want to mention is how our bias may impact that patient's ability or willingness to seek further care. So if we are that first interaction and we are the first person that they are coming to get healthcare needs or to have something taken care of, and we treat them poorly, they're likely not going to want to do anything with EMS or the emergency room or whatever that is again. And I know sometimes it can be so easy to fall into those vicious circles of, well, here we are, it's this person from this part of the town, and oh, look at this, they're likely involved in the sex trade industry or whatever that is. And then we let that bias that we have impact how we treat them and how we interact with them. And we just can't have that. So I would urge you all that whenever you are in your classrooms or working with others in a station, that we are trying to take steps to eliminate that bias from everyone and just move forward with providing adequate treatment and treating people like human beings and getting them their healthcare needs without making them feel unwelcomed or unsupported or that, you're not interested in their case. Because, the one quote here regarding the UTI, a lot of these patients may have those recurrent urinary tract infections, and it's so bad that they have no other option but to go to the emergency room for it. And whether they use EMS or, another avenue to get to the emergency room, whatever that first interaction is going to really set the tone for them for the rest of their treatment, and whether or not they can develop some, level of trust for healthcare providers and clinicians. So we all need to really work in EMS or whatever field you're in to get rid of our implicit bias and to teach the future generations of clinicians or the current generation of clinicians to treat patients the way that they should be treated. And one other really big red flag that I wanted to point out that can really be an indication of human trafficking that we can teach to people that we work with on shift or directly in the classroom is that if there's a patient that presents to you in EMS, and there's someone else with them that's especially likely not going to be any of their biologic family, and they are answering all of the questions for that patient, and that patient is not able to answer questions on their own. Or if that clinician is doing an assessment and they ask the patient a question and the patient refers to the individual that they're with and does not answer those questions, that is a red flag across the board. So this is a really big flag that we should be teaching to clinicians to identify and then go and report to the necessary chains or pass that information along to the emergency department. Whatever that is, we need to make sure that we raise awareness to this. So then something that I wanted to kind of go over with all of you is the Blue Campaign. And the Blue Campaign is through the federal government, the Department of Homeland Security. And this campaign has been around for a couple of years now. And the Department of Homeland Security established this to help increase awareness and education to the public, law enforcement, and other industry partners as to how we can identify and report and respond to potential human trafficking. And there are a lot of really nice resources that the Blue Campaign has that educators or EMS leaders can take back and use in their classrooms or in their stations to help raise awareness and educate other EMS clinicians. And before we get into some of those, this is right from the Blue Campaign, and there are 2 numbers here. So, and these are right on their website. And that top number is a phone number that is a national hotline that you can make a report to the Department of Homeland Security to investigate potential human trafficking. So this goes directly to federal law enforcement. It is that initial report, and then the federal law enforcement can navigate what they need to do next with the information that you give them. Now, on top of that, you can also always report potential human trafficking to local law enforcement. And, depending on where you're at, your state or municipality may have a regulation in place as to how they want you to report that anyways. But from a national perspective, there is this hotline that is a direct report to federal law enforcement. The number on the bottom of the screen is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And while this hotline you can make reports to, they have a much more greater ability to provide you with information or help you identify trafficking. And they can help you and even help you get to reporting to federal law enforcement. But those 2 numbers exist. They're right from the Department of Homeland Security's website for the Blue Campaign. And I urge you to have those numbers readily accessible in your stations or even in your classrooms, or at least make the students aware of where they can find those, so that when they have their careers as an EMS clinician, they at least have a resource that they can go to should they have questions. On top of that, one thing that I've really liked, and I've ordered them and used them in my classroom for both continuing education and in certification programs, is the Blue Campaign has an opportunity for you to request materials from them. And this is a screenshot right from their website. So if you go, you can look and click or hover over the resources tab, and then request materials is an option. And they have so many materials, print materials, that are available for you to order for free to bring back to your classroom or to put in your station. So, and they actually have some that are directly related to either healthcare or first responders, which is even nicer for us. So they have anything from pamphlets, which you can see on the screen there, that are trifolds, that have general information, to specific pamphlets that have information extremely relevant to law enforcement or first responders or the healthcare industry. On top of that, they also have these first responder cards, and they are a laminate square card, and they can be put in an ambulance or they can be handed out to students in a classroom. And they have almost all of the identifiers or indicators that we went over in this program right there on it. So that way, if there's ever any question or the clinician or students are looking for information, they're right there and available to them. And they're very nice and they hold up well. And then on top of that, they also have print posters that you can order. You can put these in stations, you can put these in public areas or in the classroom that have information to just bring awareness to human trafficking. So I definitely urge all of you that are in education or in a leadership role to look this up or pass this information along so that you can have it in your classrooms or in your station. On top of that, so there are some other training options that are really nice that are provided under the Blue campaign. So again, on their website, they have a tab you can hover over for training, and they have several different trainings that are available. One of the big things I wanted to point out is that they have a Blue campaign first responder training. So this training is about 45 minutes, and it's designed for law enforcement, EMS, fire, rescue, and that first responder group to go in, take this training. It's very interactive. It's all online. It's free. So this is a great opportunity to have students either, take this training directly, or to have, you say you want to, raise awareness in your station, and you can have, different EMS clinicians there take that training just as some continuing education. So that's available through the Blue campaign, and it actually is a link that goes to FEMA's website. But it's a great course that can definitely be taken advantage of, and it's free for our EMS community. And then on top of that, a lot of this information is available through videos through the Blue campaign that you can incorporate into the classroom or whatever training program you may have. So they have videos that range from general awareness and what is human trafficking to specific videos on sex trafficking or labor trafficking. And then they also have some general public service announcements to kind of for more the lay person to help identify human trafficking in just a day-to-day experience. But for us in EMS, they definitely have some great general awareness, and then some videos for labor trafficking and sex trafficking as well. And then a couple other videos they have, which just help to kind of build some relationship aspects to this, is they have survivors or human trafficking victims' personal stories that are down here in a video form that you can show that. And it helps kind of put a face and build some emotion to those stories and what's happening as well. So again, these are great teaching aids that are available to everyone for free from the Blue campaign, and are definitely have extremely reliable information and is very similar to the information that we went over for you all today. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat real quick. We can stick around for a couple of minutes to answer any that you have, and then our contact information is there. Thank you for coming today. I hope that you were able to take something away. I know sometimes this information is kind of vulgar and can be very emotional. So I thank you for attending and spending your last hour with us. And Robin, do you have anything?
No, I thank you all for attending. Again, this is something that's kind of a passion for Billy and I, kind of close to the heart. So we take it pretty seriously.
And again, we hope that we were able to provide you with enough information to take back to the classroom, and that will benefit you and your practice as a clinician. So let me pull the chat up here. Let's see if there's anything.